Thanks. Our next speaker is Mary Czerwinski. She's an adjunct professor at the University of Washington, but she's also recently retired partner research manager at the Human Understanding and Empathy Research Group at Microsoft Research. She will talk about AI technologies for promoting emotional resilience and well-being. Please take the stage.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Can I get my slides to be a little bit bigger so I can see them better? Thank you. Hi, I'm here to talk to you today about kind of the last 15 years of research my group has been doing at Microsoft Research with some of my colleagues from the University of Washington and other places as well. Our mission in the Human Understanding and Empathy group was really to provide tools so that humans could be more resilient. And we used AI technologies to do all of that. I am a cognitive psychologist. I'm not an engineer, but I worked with some brilliant PhDs who had the engineering and AI chops and visualization chops to do really nice user interfaces. We're half computer scientists, half kind of psychologists and designers. And I've got a clicker. All right. Our approach has always been to keep the user in the center in everything we design, and I hope to prove that to you today. We do a lot of human experiments on everything we prototype and build and deploy, and I will be talking about a lot of sensors in the real world today. But we understand that even though we're looking at individual humans, those individual humans live and work in groups, and they live and work in societies, and they live and work in cultures in different parts of the world. So all of these things are super important. And in my work, in particular, situated in the organization is something that turned out to be super important for stress in the workplace. Okay, it's not working for me either. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the technology innovation that we have in our portfolio that we've developed over the last 15 years or so. We have done multimodal affect sensing. I feel like the questions for the keynote this morning really queued this talk up. We took real psychological interventions and transformed them into digitally deliverable interventions to help people at work and home. And then we spent a lot of time developing conversational agents, and we learned a lot about that. So I'll get through what I can today. I'll probably just stop when I run out of time at whatever project I'm in. But the topics cover broadly. We're looking at mood, depression, anxiety. We even did an app for suicide prevention. We're looking at emotion regulation, especially in the workplace, but also at home. And then we did a lot of work with stress burnout that I won't be talking about today, but that turns out to be huge right now, especially with AI red teaming and content moderation. So here's our agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we started, the kinds of systems we put together, the kinds of sensors we used, and how we took psychologically valid interventions and transferred them into the digital space. And we spent a long time, 2 years, working on stress detection, actually, and what you do about it in the workplace. The most important thing is what you do about it. You can detect it. It's what do you do about it. And we wanted to get those workplace interventions for stress timed right and just in time using AI, which was very hard. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about, if I can build this up, is all the sensors we used to try to look at multimodal affect detection. So we use everything at our disposal. I had Daniel McDuffin on my team at the time, and he's an amazing vision scientist. And he's able to pull not only your facial expressions, the muscles you moved for affect detection, but even like heart rate variability, your breathing rate, your heart rate, just from the video alone. Of course, we looked at your voice, the prosody of your voice. When you get stressed out, your glottal muscles tense, and so we can detect stress from various aspects of your vocal tract. We look at the apps you use. We actually started there. It's super easy. How many apps are you flipping through? How many web pages do you have open? How many tabs do you have open on your screen? We can look at your calendar. We can look at how much email you're doing. A really loaded calendar is actually pretty predictive of stress, not surprisingly. Some weird things we threw in there around location. It turns out closeness to work and closeness to home turn out to be very indicative of stress. And it depends on your situation, right? So if you're really happy at work or happy at home, you don't get stressed out. But if you're not so happy there, your stress levels might go up. So all of this, we threw all of these signals into a big old AI model and did some stress modeling. The first application we built was called Affector. This was presented at CHI in 2012. That's how old it is. It wasn't in real time. We had every sensor I can imagine pointing at you. We had a webcam, we had your Kinect, we had a microphone, we had you wearing an EDA bracelet, which is measuring your electrodermal activity, which can be indicative of stress, although we don't really know the valence of it. We looked at your GPS, as I was saying, and all the other signals. And what we did then was we built a visualization that you could review. Let's say at the end of the week, you go back and look and say, at any point in time on any given day, how stressed out was I? How active was I? Who was I with? What was I doing? And so if the more purple you see the dots, the happier you are. The more blue you see the dots, the less happy you are. And if it's the one that's highlighted here is kind of bursty, that means you were super busy, okay? And people told us at the end of a 1-week study, it took a really long time to build this system, but at the end of it, people told us it wasn't so important for the very major events in their lives. They remembered those pretty well. But to see little micro patterns of stress and unhappiness, it was extremely useful. And people tend to forget that stuff really fast. So people would say things to me like, oh, I had no idea every time I go to that meeting with that person, I get so upset. Or every time I get an email from this person, I get so upset. And it was very, indicative to them of how they maybe should change their behavior, which made us feel like we need to do this in real time. And people asked for it in real time. So that was the next mission we did. The next system I want to talk about is called Parent Guardian. And this was support for parents of ADHD children. We're just talking about ADHD. This is in the Pacific Northwest anyway, I guess probably the whole West Coast, maybe in the East Coast too. It's very easy to find families with ADHD children, and usually the father is usually in tech and he has ADHD too, and many times we found that. We got 16 families to use this system. We worked with a cognitive psychologist, clinical psychologist, and we got a book that they teach parents of ADHD children to read and use and learn from. And we took all the interventions that were in the book and we divvied them up into various categories that we might show at any given time. And we put big displays in the houses of these families, kind of in the kitchen homework area. And we deployed this system from 4 to 8 p.m. at night. And what it did was the mother would wear an EDA bracelet, and we used AI to try to predict when a meltdown of their child was going to happen. And if we did it right, and we got it just before the meltdown, it was magical. We would send a little intervention to their phone. You can see a picture of 2 of them right here. But we'd also send the picture without the text to the display in the room, the big display. So the parents could either look at the display, they could look at their phone, but in fact, the first week, they weren't wearing the bracelets, they were just using the app because we wanted them to get familiar with it. They'd actually memorized all the interventions. They said they would page it through like where their kids were at soccer practice or something. So they'd memorized them. So what ended up happening was when they'd get a buzz that they were about to experience like a big stressful situation in the house, they would hear their phone buzz, but maybe it was on the table. And it was just enough of a cue to them that they'd pick their favorite intervention from the group. And it was another great use of AI because when the AI was wrong and there wasn't a meltdown occurring, they said it was fine because they knew there was no meltdown. But when it happened just in time, it was extremely empowering. And the only other anecdote I'll tell about this one is that I was preparing for a presentation to my VP 2 years after we took the bracelets away. They just had this app. 8 of the 16 families were still using the app. To me, that's like I don't know, I've been in the business for a really long time. That means it was sticky. But I will also say these parents were extremely motivated, right? So I've found that time and time again, when you design an application for a population that's very motivated, they do tend to use it longer. Okay, the next thing we built was called Pop Therapy. This was brilliant. Pablo Paredes was the intern that worked on this one. And he had this wonderful idea that because we had the Windows Phone at the time, yes, people actually used it at one point. We knew what people were doing on their phones. And so his idea that was so cute was, let's take a bunch of things from psychology, a bunch of interventions from psychology that are well proven, and marry them to the top 10 things people do on their phones. There are probably more than top 10 things, but that was kind of the idea. So I'll just use one very simple example that you all will find familiar. It's very well known from positive psychology. You know, think of 3 things you're thankful for, and actually makes you feel better. Maybe write a note to these people about it. So instead of that, we would say, go to Facebook and scroll for 3 things you're thankful for instead of just grazing mindlessly, right? So we built a bunch of interventions like this. You can kind of see a summary of them here. And we had a little character. His name was Bubo, and he was supposed to be a wise owl. Now, this system actually used AI to learn about you and which interventions worked for you. So after you did an intervention, you would do a thumbs up, thumbs down. But we actually had kind of a nice study. Well, here's a little bit about the AI algorithm, if you're interested. It's probably pretty old now, so it's probably outdated. The important thing is that we retrain the model every night. After the users used the interventions and they would thumbs up or thumbs down that they liked them, or we could see which ones they used, we would update the models every night. So here's just an example of what it looks like. And we tried, it's always challenging when you do this behavior change kind of application, because you want people to use it and you have to encourage them to use it somehow. And in this case, we did a raffle. And the more often you used the app, the more likely you would probably win more money in a raffle, right? So we tried to make it lightweight. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it seemed to work. This was the experiment. What we did was we divvied people up into 2 conditions. If you can believe it, back then we didn't actually know if AI and personalization would actually help with behavior change. So we had an ML condition and we had a random recommendation condition. In random, they could just get any intervention sent to them. In the machine learning condition, they would get sent the interventions that they tended to use and said helped them more, that they liked. And then we split it up again. Some people could pick from a menu, and some people had to take the intervention that was delivered to them, and we wanted to see if that made a difference as well. And suffice it to say, the random condition worked because you can see the kinds of interventions people used were all over the place. It came from all the categories. But in the machine learning condition, you can see people started to hone in on certain interventions that they really liked. What they really liked was social time, so anything with a social person. I can't remember what the brown one is, social souls. That looks like a typo. They really liked me body health, so anything that was like a stretch or an exercise where you could actually do it in your office in a couple seconds, people really liked that too. So you can see that as the machine learning starts to get to know what you like, you start to use those interventions. And everyone's different. We talked about that a bunch today. So if you say, well, which interventions did most people like? Everybody's different. So you can't throw away any category of interventions because there's just somebody out there that wants to use it. What actually was more of a problem was that we only had it was under 100 interventions. And so when the machine learning started honing in on which ones you liked, it started to get a little repetitious. So, you know, really you want to have a much, much higher number of interventions. And I think the main thing about this app was people said it made them aware of their stress levels, and being aware of the stress levels made them less stressful, but it taught them simple ways to control their stress. And that's all we were shooting for, was to help everyday people, whether at work or at home, be able to control their stress. And this is just a quick slide to show that the everyone got better over the 4 weeks, but the people in the machine learning conditions got better. Yeah, they got better, significantly better. And it didn't really matter if you could choose or had to take the one the machine learning system recommended. That didn't make too much of a difference. And this is out of 20 participants who did the whole 4 weeks, oh, that's another story about this. We had 100 participants for 4 weeks. The most stressed out ones were the first ones to drop the app. And they were the sickest, they had kids, they had a horrible job. And so we still didn't get a design that worked for them, right? But we got a design that helped people. So we'd moved the needle a little bit in the right direction. I can't remember what this one, oh, the machine learning. The machine learning group on measures of stress did better. So having those personalized interventions, this was the first evidence we saw with just everyday people that having personalized AI recommendations of psychological interventions actually helped. Okay, the next thing we did was Emma. Emma was strictly on the phone. The only sensors we used were on the mobile phone. We didn't have anything, you weren't wearing anything. And Emma really relied on a lot of self-reports. I think the keynote speaker this morning said, you wouldn't want to do more than 10 self-reports in a day, would you? Well, we've done like 20 a day before. And this one we weren't so bad. This was more like 8 to 10 a day. And what we learned is we can detect. We use this 2x2, I don't know, does anybody know this emotion 2x2 grid from Russell, this Russell model? Nobody knows it, okay. In the upper right corner is when you have high energy and you're feeling great. In the lower left corner, it's when you have low energy and you're feeling horrible, and you can assume what the other two are. And the mistake we found here, the system helped a lot when people were feeling negative. But when people are feeling happy or calm, don't send them an intervention. They don't want to do anything. They feel great. So that was a big lesson we learned. But it does help when they're in the other two quadrants. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about digital translation of evidence-based interventions. In this particular one, we didn't use AI, but we used a very sophisticated chatbot. There's a woman named Dr. Marcia Linehan. She's at the University of Washington. Actually, she just retired a few years ago. And she's an extremely famous clinical psychologist. She invented dialectical behavior therapy, which is called DBT. It includes some CBT, but it has extra stuff from Eastern religions. And it's specifically designed for people with borderline personality disorder, which Marcia had. But she didn't tell anybody until the very end of her career that she had suffered from it. So she had this suite of books that everybody who was trained in DBT had to use, and if you were in therapy for DBT, you had to read them and use them. And she came to us and she said, you know, Mary, she goes, I really, really like Microsoft, and I really want Microsoft to deliver this to the world. And I said, okay, because apparently she'd been approached by Google and many other tech companies. And I said, okay, I felt very flattered. So I went through the whole DBT books. We hired a professional design firm, and we decided to use Marcia, the image of Marcia, as the character in this particular conversational application. And that was the most successful thing we could have done, because if you're in DBT, or if you're even thinking about doing DBT, you know who Marcia Linehan is. And so they basically worshipped this woman. And we got 100 suicidal people. First, we did 16 people, where we did just the iteration of the user interface and everything. And then we got 100 suicidal people and had them use the app. We also did one thing that really worked beautifully, was that we took one of Marcia Linehan's PhD students. She was a clinical psychologist, and she was the one who really just made DBT so much more approachable and updated and fun. So that was great. So you can see a little bit of what it looks like here. We're not actually using AI to come up with these questions. The user will answer a question, and we'll just have a pat response that makes sense no matter what they said, right? And sometimes we can feed back the same words you use to make it look like, you know, we know what you're saying, but there was no AI in this at all. Oh, good Lord. Why is it not? Probably went too far now. No? Okay. All right, so this is Pocket Skills. This is what it looks like. When you go through DBT, you have to go through all these different modules. It starts very simple with techniques to just keep yourself from killing yourself, like putting your head in a bucket of ice water or snapping your wrist with a rubber band, things like that. And then you go into mindfulness training and emotion regulation training and things like that. We had videos of Marcia that you could unlock if you used the app more or you finished one of the sections. But the very first study, with the 16 people, we paid users to use it. In this study with 100 users for 4 weeks, we actually let them just unlock videos of Marcia, and that's how much they loved her. We didn't have to pay them at all. They were so motivated. These were very suicidal people. So that's what it looked like. We did show that over 4 weeks, we could decrease symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I think the reason was because they could take the phone out of their pocket, they could do a little bit of DBT, they didn't have to call anyone, they didn't have to call their doctor, and they saw that it worked. And so it made them use it more. They got excited, they used it more. And we got lots and lots of subjective feedback to that effect. So I think it just taught them self-efficacy. Pocket skills helped me break down something that seemed overwhelming into manageable bits I could do on my own. And you can see over down in the left-hand side, by lots of clinically relevant psychological metrics, not only did some of these, mostly women, improve, but some of them actually were technically recovered only in 4 weeks, which was amazing. Sad story to end all this is that Microsoft lawyers were very afraid that someone would commit suicide using a Microsoft app. And we had to give it all back to Marcia. And then she retired, and it's just sitting there. And this was all before the pandemic, so it could have really helped people, but alas. Okay, the next thing we did was we wanted to do just-in-time interventions at work, so to help people with stress and anxiety at work. And we had the idea, Gina Sue had this idea of building Huey, our group was called Hugh, so it's called Huey, of building this little character-based conversational interface into Teams, because that's where most people at Microsoft lived, and we were, at this point, using a lot of Microsoft participants in our studies. And again, just like usual, we had the camera, the microphone, all the sensors we typically use, plus lots of self-reports. And what we would do is we would use that information to start to try to predict when you were getting stressed out. And Huey would come up and say, hey, is this a good time for an intervention? Are you up for it? And you could easily get rid of it. But if you had 5 minutes, all the interventions were less than 5 minutes, you could go ahead and do it. There was another condition where you scheduled it. I can't remember if I showed that one or not. I can't really read that, so I'm going to move on. So, one of the interventions is just like writing down a plan so that you won't get stressed out, a plan of action, right? That's a well-known psychological intervention. And you can just see like a little conversation with Huey on the side. This is what it would look like in Teams. And, like I said, all the interventions were short, and some of them were not this complicated. Some of them were very low effort, like just get my mind off work. You would watch a video of a cat or a beach, something like that. Medium effort ones were more like mindfulness and grounding exercises. Turn off the lights in your room, take a pause. And then the high effort ones were actually moving you through behavior change, like moving you through CBT kinds of activities for reframing your problems. And what we found in this study, again, it was about 4 weeks of time when people use the system. You're always going to hear about 4-week experiments because these are always intern projects and they only have 12 weeks. So, you get to the end when you build a system and that's all the time you have. That people's choices in momentary micro-interventions were pretty varied, but most people wanted just in time, automatic. They didn't want to have to pick from a menu. They didn't want to have to plan it. They didn't want to put it in their calendar. They actually did say if AI could see where the stress is going to happen and just automatically schedule something for them, they would like that. But most people just wanted them just in time, automatically delivered by the system, but they also wanted a way to just turn it all off too. The people who did the harder interventions progressed further in their stages of behavior change that they were desiring. So the harder work does give you the best benefit, but the easy interventions still help with stress. So it's a win-win. Okay, I'm going to move on to our studying workplace stress. Why focus on stress? I think it's pretty self-evident, but it's probably the most expensive thing a corporation has to deal with. Stress probably, well, I know for a fact, it's worse than like heart disease, or it causes all kinds of back issues, shoulder issues, digestive problems. It's worse than alcoholism at work. It's just really, really expensive for corporations. And so we decided to help Microsoft and try to focus on that. And we were hoping we could deliver it not just to Microsoft, but everywhere. So we wanted to get rid of stress, but I'm not saying stress is always bad. There's good stress. I don't know if any of you know about the Yerkes-Dodson curve from psychology, but it's good to have a little stress, like before you give a talk in front of a bunch of people, but it's bad when you get too much stress. Then your performance starts going down. So there's kind of like this optimal place in stress where you can be really productive and really your performance is really high. So it's normal, but a lot of people aren't used to thinking about it, and a lot of people don't know how to regulate it. So people tell us that they're super stressed out all the time. This was just before the pandemic and partly during the pandemic. We were hearing a lot about stress, but people don't really know what to do about it. So we decided to build this thing called M365 Care. It was kind of a play on the Microsoft 365 products because we were hoping to ship it in that. And the idea here was, we do our sensing work like we always do. We have our great list of interventions now. We hired another clinical psychologist from Berkeley, Esther Howe, and she helped us even expand our list of interventions. Now we're talking about, we have tons of interventions, and we knew from previous studies that using AI to personalize the delivery of these things would be really important. First thing you have to do is find out what's stressing everybody out. There were lots of stressors that Microsoft employees, I think this was 2,100 Microsoft employees, told us what was stressing them out. And the big stress categories you can see here, it's not surprising: work overload, work-life balance, getting interrupted, having too many meetings. Work-life balance was a huge one. Bad managers, bad organizational management was always up there. And then, what people did to calm themselves was not, the kind of psychological interventions that would actually help them, change their behavior. So we looked at the prediction algorithms and which sensors were actually the most effective at feeding into them accurate and getting accurate classification. It turns out that the camera was the best. But people are super not happy with having the camera and the microphone turned on them all the time. If they were participating in a study and then they consented and everything, they were okay with it. But outside of that, they're like, that's just too much surveillance. If you add all the sensors together, it's obviously optimal. But you can see that some of these application markers were actually, categories were actually pretty good. So later, we decided to get rid of the camera and the microphone, and our current system to date doesn't even have the camera and microphone turned on. And we're pretty good at identifying stress. The key, though, is it takes time to learn about users' preferences, just like we were talking about with pop therapy. And here it looked like it was taking about 3 weeks to get up to 80% accuracy. So it takes time for a system to learn about you intimately so that it doesn't bother you and annoy you with bad timings of interventions. And we built a design probe. We incorporated it into the calendar. And I think that worked really well. And users told us that it was great for looking ahead. If they were going to schedule an intervention, what we should have done is hook this up with Huey. If they wanted to schedule an intervention, they could look ahead and they could say, yeah, that's going to be a really bad week. Because it's great to be able to look ahead and plan for those things. Because when you're in the moment, you just can't. You can't function that way. So users told us that they really liked that. It made them think better about how they spend their time. And I think I will end it there. Thank you so much, and time for questions.
Thank you for an inspiring talk. I'm pretty sure there are tons of questions. Until you walk up, maybe I have one. You mentioned this.
Someone raised their hand, but yeah.
Very nice talk. Thank you so much. I have a question. I'm an assistant professor working in Wichita State University, and I like to do research all the time. And sometimes I'm thinking, it would be better to transfer my research from the lab to industry. So from industrial perspective, do you have any suggestions for researchers working in the lab?
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft Research is kind of a very interesting place because it's a lab academic atmosphere in an industrial setting, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of that, if you can figure out a way to do that, is that you get access to all this amazing data. Like, I didn't even talk about all the data that we use to kind of drive these models and stuff, but you know, like I had all of Office and Teams and Bing and all those different applications where we could pull usage data out. So there's a huge benefit to working and seeing if your stuff works in the real world. That's what I like about it. I've always liked to be a little bit applied. And I think the thing you could do is just start by finding an industry researcher that works in the same area you do that you would love to collaborate with, and reach out and see what happens.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, talking into the mic. So you have this phenomenal tool, and being at Microsoft, you also have access to resources that very few people have, right? You have, you know, academic level research, you have industrial level commercial support, and you have mountains and mountains of data and distribution to the entire world at your fingertips. So what do you think are the best ways to bring this tool into the world to help as many people as possible?
Yeah, that was the idea. It was funny, we finished this M365 stress detector and intervention provider right before the pivot to AI, when everyone did the hard pivot. What year was that? 2022, I can't even remember anymore. And everyone in the lab was told to work on AI, like only. And I thought we were working on AI, but we never got to deploy this because we were told to work on something else. And so what we did instead was we took everything we've learned and tried to make AI more empathic. So we worked with the Bing team and really helped them define their algorithms and whatnot so that we got rid of all kinds of horrible things that the system could say or do or whatever. So that made everybody super happy, but we never got to deploy M365 Care, so that's really sad. And now I'm gone. So, but my folks are still there, the team, and they're still very, very excited to do more stuff like this, but it hasn't been deployed yet. Some of the algorithms that we use to detect emotional state did get shipped, and those are already in products. So
in Microsoft products,
yes,
or white labeled elsewhere?
Yes. So it's not a complete loss, but I really wanted the whole system with the intervention delivery and everything. I really wanted that.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
So we have a question from online.
Okay.
It's from Anonymous. What are your thoughts on how long-term exposure to AI-driven emotional support systems might subtly rewire our internal emotional regulation processes? Can resilience be externally scaffolded without compromising intrinsic emotional autonomy?
That's a really good one. There's a lot to untangle in there. I'll tell you what I'm worried about. Right now, I'm worried about kids using AI chatbots for psychotherapy because we don't have the guardrails in place right now, or even the ways to steer these AI systems so that they deliver good advice and age-appropriate advice. And also, as we've seen from the work, personalization is so important, and they are not personalized yet. So I think that's a very dangerous situation, and I really hope that people are paying attention to it. I just joined the board of the Association for Psychological Science, and it's one of the issues I'm going to get them to take up. But in terms of using AI to kind of change your behavior, and I'm hoping in a way that you want to change your behavior, I think that's a good thing, and you would rewire your brain a little bit to do that. When you meditate, you rewire your brain. So I don't think that would be a bad thing. I think you'd still be autonomous as long as you're changing your behavior in the way you choose to change your behavior. If there's something nefarious that's trying to manipulate you, and which does scare me, that would be really scary and bad. So a lot more policy and work needs to go on in this area. I'm just glad my former colleagues are still working hard on this space.
So I was just looking at a paper that talked about how like the belief that stress is beneficial could be even more like helpful to reduce the negative effects of stress rather than reducing high stress itself.
The belief in, what was the first thing you
The
said?
belief that stress is beneficial for you. Like, what do you think about that as a potential intervention?
Well, it is. As I said
Yeah.
earlier, the Yerkes-Dodson curve. Stress does help you, right? And some people know that they get more done when they're stressed out. It's just finding that optimal level of stress. So there's this thing called eustress, which is the good stress, right? What we wanted to get rid of was chronic stress, where it leads to lower heart rate variability and chronic problems and depression and anxiety, et cetera. So stress is not bad, as I put in a whole slide there. It's not that stress is bad. It's that when you have chronic stress, then you have all these psychological and physiological problems that come from that.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
What are your thoughts on the concern that interaction with chatbots is potentially replacing human interaction, and where do you think we find the balance in that?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. That's what scares me so much. I mean, you already see people retreating to their headphones, retreating to their phones. Now they're retreating to characters. We had a chatbot, a prototype at Microsoft called Tay. I don't know if anybody remembers that incident, but it was horrific, and just immediately went into really, really bad behavior. We also had one called Xiaomei that was very popular with Chinese around 16-year-old boys, and they would spend hours and hours and hours with that chatbot. And I think when it starts detracting from your social network, and we know very well in psychology that your social network is extremely important for your happiness and your well-being. I think as soon as you start retreating from your social network or start having a sparser social network, it's bad. It's going to be bad.
And perhaps if I can quickly follow up, has there been any investigation into using them as like mediators for group therapies or other such?
I haven't heard of group therapy. I've heard of them as mediators for meetings. And that, I worked on a little project like that. That's actually kind of cool, because then nobody's saying, there's no one person that's trying to shut someone down or, say we can't talk about this topic anymore. It's like completely objective, right? So we did that to keep meetings on time. We built a little bot, and that worked really well. So.
So I was just, hello, thank you
Hi.
very much for the presentation.
Thank
It
you.
was really insightful in seeing how people can relate to and from stress. And I was listening a little bit to your talk about people with BPD and the way that they went about associating with the, I'm blanking on the woman's name who wanted to build a system.
Marsha
thank you.
Linehan, yeah.
And they loved the fact that it was her face helping them.
Yes.
My question to you, because I know a lot of people with BPD, they struggle with the trust, and the main issue
Right.
is suddenly they stop trusting when
Right.
that trust is broken. Did you run any other variations of that application where you tested to seeing if replacing Marsha with other trusted individuals elicited similar responses from the subjects?
Great question. First of all, I didn't say this, but Marsha is the most commanding personality you will ever meet. If you start DBT with her, she makes you swear you will do this. Like, you sign a contract with Marsha. She's super intense. So even in her videos, she's super intense. You can't take your eyes off her, and you would do anything she says. So we got very lucky that in the end, we went with her as the persona. But the first prototype we built, we had just this kooky little cucumber-looking thing. And the first 16 suicidal patients we put through that one, they did not like that at all. It was too cartoony. But when we tried Marsha, so we tried a few, but Marsha was the one they really, really liked. And I think that would be true in just about anything. If you got a celebrity or something like that, I think people admire, I think it would help your conversational app, whatever kind it is.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Thanks again, everybody.
Let's thank the speaker again. One theme in all of your talks is, of course, computational model. What I want to ask about something else is visual feedback or user interface feedback that is somehow in all of your talks, whether it's like interacting with the GPT or an app or visual feedback in navigation. Does it seem to be like another theme in addition to the computational theme? So can you like touch upon that to get started?
Well, visual feedback is super important, obviously, right? In all of our stress sensing work, we found very early on that if you start showing people they're stressed out, they get more stressed out. So you don't want to do that. So you want to do the opposite almost. You want to like help them understand when's a good time to not, to prepare to not be stressed out later, right? So we had to learn that the hard way. And yeah, there's some user interfaces we've designed that are just kind of more childlike, not professional enough. And I found that unless you make the user interface super professional, very polished, people won't use it. Parent Guardian was a great example. I didn't say that during my talk, but it was so well designed. It was very cartoonish, but it was very easy to remember. It was kind of iconic in terms of the intervention visual descriptions. And that's why the parents were able to memorize it really quickly. So yeah, it's super important.
I guess I would just sort of trying to like almost tie the themes together. For me, there's you want to target the like where people what they want from it, right? And it almost gets like their belief states to like the kind of beliefs they're trying to extract about it. So as we've been trying to develop interfaces for our clinicians, and even just kind of exploring this, it's going to look very different for different types of clinicians, right? So like a physical therapist is probably going to want an interface that still exposes the most data, but like less than maybe a biomechanist. And then you might have like the rehabilitation physician might want a little bit more information, maybe how it pertains to function. And then I could easily imagine in like PCP or neurology clinics, well, neurologists I don't want to speak to, but like PCPs would probably want an interface that very much looks like an alert. Just like someone walks in, hey, we've identified a new movement impairment. Like either this looks like the kind of thing where they should go to physical therapy, or this seems like the kind of thing they should go to a neurologist. And so I do think there's, and this kind of gets to the human-centeredness, right, as well. Like, so being very thoughtful about the interfaces. And I guess that's more interfaces than feedback, right? Because then when you get into like neurorehabilitation, there's like, EMG biofeedback, motor biofeedback, and then you really need to be embracing like what are the motor learning principles you're trying to derive, and then does that, the way you provide that feedback, like really induce those principles?
I think people are so, I mean, we have this idea of images, and we always think in terms of images. And I think when you look at natural behavior, if you look at what is the image on the back of the retina, if you're into eye tracking and you see this for the first time, you get this appreciation, oh, that's not an image, right? So somehow culturally we think about these images and we do computer vision on the images, but what people process that's so different. And I think in these tasks, you get this appreciation how much the input is convolved somehow with your internal model, how a single eye movement may extract something and not process the image at all. There's some beautiful experiments in virtual reality where you can exchange all sorts of properties of objects while people are interacting with them. If those object properties are not relevant for the task, people don't notice. You can change the texture, the color. You can change all sorts of things. They continue doing something with these objects. It's fine if the task if it's not relevant for the task. So I think we tend to have this cultural idea of images and vision. And of course, it's relevant if you're looking at an interface on a computer monitor, but really this visual processing is very, very different, particularly in natural tasks.
I love that one illusion where you give that, it's that video where you ask people to count the number of times a basketball is passed, and then as it's playing, like this monkey just walks in, this person in a monkey suit just walks in, does a little dance, and like most people just don't see it, right?
Awesome talks, by the way. I just had a question regarding the use of AI and emotional well-being. So whenever I'm not a student, I work in special education, and a lot of the models that you discussed, like the parent guardian and the pop therapy, I felt like they would be very useful in the educational setting. And I know that you mentioned that you're not sure what it would look like if children had like access directly to the AI models, but I was wondering what it would look like in maybe an educational setting where teachers could use these models to detect meltdowns that may occur, or have just an assistant whenever students are getting very overwhelmed in the classroom.
Yeah, that's an application we talked about a lot. To really help students learn optimally, we want them at that right place in the Yerkes-Dodson curve, right? We don't want them to be bored. We want them to be engaged. So you could definitely use this kind of technology there. We also applied it to doctors. Turns out oncologists get less and less empathic the longer they are a doctor, because they have to tell people all this bad news for so long, so their bedside manner goes down. I don't know if that's true for teachers too, but we used some of these techniques to train doctors to be more empathic to their patients, to at least make them aware of when they weren't. And that was extremely helpful. So yeah, I think you could definitely apply it in the education space. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's been a really depressing theme I've seen for a number of the AI language models when there've been like head-to-head double-blinded trials of an AI chatbot versus a physician. Not only are the chatbots often like outperforming in terms of like diagnostic accuracy, but they like crush the physicians in terms of empathy. Now I think a lot of that's like a chat interface, right? And you got this one thing that has like infinite tolerance for typing incredibly long curated speech, and then I know I get bored typing, but.
I have a question from online. So this is toward Professor Rothkopf. How central is active perception, such as eye movements or exploratory behavior, to updating belief states in natural settings? Could this be modeled or measured meaningfully in complex environments like cities or neighborhoods without landmarks?
So, I mean, I think if you look at the psychological literature, people pretty early on picked up on this idea that somehow vision, particularly, is not passive, right? But it's tricky, I think, to quantify these things and to answer such a question if you don't have a model. Without a model, it's very difficult to say, well, was this eye movement, what was its purpose? So, of course, we don't always know what people's goals are when they are going, I don't know, shopping, to an appointment, just taking a walk out there in a cityscape. But I do think that's the way to go. So that's what we are also working on. I briefly mentioned the inverse modeling. So often we have experiments where we try to figure out what are the goals that people have in naturalistic behavior. So I think it's possible. It's difficult because we cannot characterize fully, well, what are the uncertainties they are dealing with. And landmarks, it's not landmarks only like a church, a big landmark, but many things are used as landmarks for people to orient themselves. So yes, absolutely, it should be possible. The question is how to model it. But we're working on it. And others are working on it too, of course.
Thank you. I wondered if you guys had an opinion on the kind of trust and the buy-in of people when we're kind of trying to look at everyday tasks, but we're using, you know, an online chatbot or a task that's in VR, for example, and how that's people's experience of that is changing over time. So, for example, if you rotate a landmark in the task, and people are like, oh, well, that wouldn't happen in the real world. Like, how is that informing people's behaviors, and we're judging how people will behave in the real world when these things don't normally happen? Or, for example, if the chatbot says something that they don't agree with, if there's an immediate, like, well, I don't trust this anymore, how do we keep people kind of engaged in that, and how is that changing over time as we become more reliant on technology?
I actually did an experiment on that a long time before AI got so popular. I looked at an AI system that would give you advice on a puzzle called Boggle. And if the advice was 80% correct, even when it went down to 20%, like after 10 minutes, it started just saying really wrong things, users kept using it. But if it started out at 20%, after 10 minutes, they wouldn't even use it anymore, right? And we looked at trust in other ways too. We looked at things like beauty and things like that in agents. People are very finicky. If an AI system doesn't work out the box, I think it's not going to be trusted and it won't be used. So you have to make sure that these things are very trustworthy. We did a lot of work on that, honestly.
I mean, I guess I would also just say in the biomechanics space too, at the other extreme, sometimes those things that are non-physiological or plausible are therapeutic. And so like, it's funny, there's some perturbation study papers I've read where they were trying to use it as a readout on the status of the nervous system, but plasticity was so pronounced that like single trial perturbations and then people's behavior totally changed, right? But then that can actually be used therapeutically to change behavior in the real world and make people more robust to falls.
Yeah, you nailed it exactly. There was one data point that on all the slides wasn't modeled correctly. That was when the landmarks were rotated 115 degrees. And what happens in that condition, participant in the beginning, they may think, oh, something is funny here. But towards the end of that session, that block of trials, they totally don't rely on the landmarks anymore because they're thinking, these psychologists are just playing some trick on me. And I completely disregard the landmarks. So, yes.
Thank you. It's fantastic comments and answers. Let's thank the speakers again. With that, we are at time, and we're going to go to lunch break.